be more testing SOP, the second iteration of testing SOP 3.0. A lot of the foundational stuff that we teach here are still applicable and still make sense, but this is going to kind of conceptualize it furthermore, in a way that allows you guys to visualize the step-by-step strategy. And as I'm putting this all together, I know that this might seem like a lot, might even for some of you seem a little confusing. Which ones do you apply? You'll see that, again, I'm really stressing more so the first principles and fundamental information more so than the specifics. And that's why this can be confusing to you, because you're looking for specific, in this training you said to launch it for 2 days, but now in this training you're saying launch it for 3 days. Is it 2 or 3 days, Alex? See, that type of stuff will get you in trouble, because although I'm trying my best to make this as clear and congruent and easy for you guys to follow, what you have to understand is, again, the first principles of marketing, right? Like the things that we're covering, try to focus more on the concept and the approach more so than anything. So we have this mirror board training here, phase 1, which is 1 to 3 days of testing, and then phase 4, which is creating variations and kind of trying to troubleshoot the ads to get them in place that it is actually profitable. The KPIs are essentially what we're going for, and these KPIs are going to stay true to what we teach and do. And then we have different like scenarios based off of what you do, how you should do this, and that's going to stay true to everything that we kind of cover and test here. Okay, so focus on the core principles and the foundation. I'm going to put together and share with you guys another kind of board here of information. And a lot of, again, should be the same stuff that you already should know from that testing SOP training. If you haven't watched it, go back and watch it. But we're going to kind of conceptualize it a little bit differently here. So that way, if I can keep reiterating some of these points, maybe it will be easier for you guys to understand, because I'm speaking at it in different ways. So essentially what you do, ideally, what I would recommend you do, and actually I didn't even finish reading the document here. So as a reminder, there's no hardcore rules of testing. Right? You're not going to find one universal testing strategy that works every single time. So it's important to remember the main rule is deploy better ads and you'll make more money. That's literally the end goal. Whoever can deploy the ads, meaning they load up the ads in the ad set or the campaign and they spend money, whoever does that the best will make more money. So don't worry about, should I test for 1 day, 2 days, 3 this day? Focus more on, if I can deploy more ads and get good thorough testing behind them, that's how I would make more money. It's just by deploying better ads and making more money, and that's how I make more money. The way you deploy them doesn't matter as much as ensuring that you're analyzing what's working and not working and making decisions based off of that. With that being said, I know some of you will ignore this message and message me stuff like, Alex, when should I turn off this ad? Or Alex, do you think I need to add new variations now or wait until tomorrow? Or Alex, should I increase the budget and wait another day? Right? So these are such arbitrary questions that doesn't matter, that don't matter as much as you think. Now, when I say they don't matter, obviously they matter, but hearing a specific answer for me isn't going to be the most conducive way of learning the strategy as a whole and making decisions on as a whole. You're way better off learning as you go, and specifically for these arbitrary questions where you're not sure, simply because we have the foundations of what we need to focus on. And as long as you make decisions off of that one core foundation, then you're good to go. Make the decision, live with the decision, and learn from it and continue to move on. Unfortunately, there are going to be certain pieces of information that works well for you, but not as well as other people. And the only way to know is by just testing. All right, so these are just such arbitrary questions that don't matter as much as you think in the grand scheme of things. Facebook has one goal: make people enjoy the content and that they see on the platform and make money. If you create an ad that sparks emotional engagement with the target avatar, great, your ads are doing its job. Here's the rough outline of how I would tackle this, right? So essentially what I would do. So to kind of reiterate the other points, but maybe in a slightly different way, that way it maybe can be conceptualized differently, right? So here's ideally the timeline of how I would test. So days 1 to 3, I'm going to launch an CBO with one ad set, which would be maybe my avatar testing with 5 ads. Each ad is their own angle. And I'm going to launch that for 3 days, leveraging our avatar Bible and avatar prompting scripts. So the initial trainings that we have inside the course, talking about how to build an avatar and the avatar Bible, that's what I would do and launch that. Like I mentioned in the previous training, there's a world where it makes sense that you could just launch 2, one for the avatar and one for the Reddit storytelling. So you would have one CBO with 2 ad sets on day 1 of testing, 5 ads in each. Each ad is unique and different in its own way. And then the whole point of that and the whole idea between deploying that is to see which storytelling format works better, avatar testing or Reddit testing. Again, choice is up to you. What's the pro and con in one or the other? There isn't anything too big. Basically, the biggest pro is that you get a little bit of data faster as far as seeing which one is going to perform better than the other. But you kind of go a little bit surface level because your spend is limited based off of how well it gets distributed between one ad set versus the other. You can set a minimum daily spend, which we'll talk about in a moment, but it's not entirely mandatory. It's optional. But that is kind of what you would want to do. The overarching goal, guys, though, in the first 3 days of testing is to simply just see if there's potential here with the product, with the avatar, the industry as a whole. Okay. So if within the first 48 hours, you get no buying intent at all, here's an exception to the rule of 3-day testing. If you get no buying intent at all within the first 40 hours, you don't need to wait until day 3. But assuming you get even one or 2 add to carts, continue to test until day 3. In other words, yes, the first few days might not look good. You might not get a ton of customers or even no purchases. But if there's some buying intent, some spark of potential buyers, that is all you need to continue to a full thorough 3-day test and just let the data spend for those 3 days. You're not adjusting the budget. You're not changing the country. You're not changing anything. You're just literally letting it spend. The reason why we do this, especially early on $50 to $100 a day budget, that is actually not enough money per day to get a ton of conclusive data, right? We're just trying to test the waters and see if it makes sense to continue to go further. And we're never really going to be profitable, and we're never really going to be even break even a lot of the times in the first 3 days. We're just simply doing that to see if there even makes sense to continue. And the way to make sense to ensure that it makes sense to continue is if there's a little bit of buying intent. All right, that's the biggest thing to understand. All right. And I wouldn't stress too much about your ad metrics per se. If your CPMs are really high and out of KPI and stuff like that, that's ultimately fine. We can create better ads to reduce those expensive cost metrics. Same thing with getting more buying intent. But you want to see if your surface level messaging and marketing is resonating enough to continue. So that's what I would do the first 3 days. Don't touch anything. Day 4, I'm going to look at my data and make a decision. If there is buying intent, like add to carts, initiate checkouts, purchases, and ad metrics are close to KPI, great, I'll move on and continue to work on making this avatar a winner. On the opposite end, if it's the first 3 days are up and I have horrible ad metrics far outside of KPI and I have no buying intent, then I'd move on and test another avatar in the same CBO, but a new ad set and repeat the first step again. Right? So that's essentially the rule of thumb there. If you have no buying intent within the first 48 hours, you don't need to continue on to day 3. You could just start now by turning off that ad set and launching a new ad set that you're ready to deploy and get the ball rolling on. Okay, this is your opportunity. You can use a second avatar, a third avatar, or you can go to another Reddit story or Reddit tension point if that's what you did. What you do next is totally up to you. And again, we won't have the answer until we test. So you can flip a coin damn near. Now, here's what I will say. If you're doing your research and you're going through and you're looking through Reddit and whatnot, and you're finding that there's a commonality between what you're seeing in your messaging, it probably makes sense to make a decision whether or not to go on to the next avatar test or a Reddit post test based off of what you're gathering in the market. If you see that, the first avatar focused on, let's say I was selling these blue light glasses, and you see that the first avatar you tested was focused on selling blue light glasses to stay-at-home moms, right? Because that was the avatar angle. If you see that that's a big thing, if you tested that first and it didn't perform well, you go back to the drawing board, start to do more research, and you find that the research is focused heavily on people that work at an office job. Logically speaking, it makes sense to look at your avatar portfolio and see if any of those avatars that was created resonates with what you're manually seeing in the research from the Reddit scrape. If yes, go through and either create the next avatar test centered around the updated research and data you found. If you can't come to anything conclusive and you're not sure what steps to take, just pick one and go from there. But ideally, when you do a test in the first 3 days and you decide to cut it or move on, analyze what went wrong and see if you can gather more information to make a more conclusive next step. Because I tell you right now, testing one avatar or one Reddit story and flop and deciding to move on to a new product is a bad idea, right? You're going to just keep cycling through products over and over and over again. It's better to just cycle through a couple different avatars or a couple different Reddit stories first before just deciding to cut the product entirely. How many should you do? That's an arbitrary number, totally up to you, right? Like I talked about earlier in the training, we have some students that test 70 different angles and avatars before they find one that works. We have others that test 3, 2, 5, 10. It's an arbitrary number. We don't know. What I can tell you is that if you spend time focusing on how you can be more decisive with the next test based off the feedback you're getting in the market and also looking at your competition in the market, you can take a more educated guess, right? Because now between the 5 avatars and the 5 angles per avatar, and now the Reddit story test, you have a ton of different marketing copy that you can create and test. And you don't want to have to just kind of guess and cycle through all of them. And that's a lot of money you're going to be testing before you find one. So if I were you, I would focus on analyzing 2 things to make my next decision. Even the first decision should be analyzed from this perspective. I would run the Reddit scrape and gather as much information that you can gather from that Reddit scrape. If you can try to, every product and every niche is going to be different. So if you can identify an avatar clearly as day in the Reddit scrape, right? So go through the Reddit scrape, actually read some of the Reddit posts and also what cloud output for you. And you can find and test clearly that there's an avatar that resonates with that, then do an avatar test next or first. If you can't find a conclusive avatar, right, a synonymous avatar that shares like characteristics and features and functionalities, then do another Reddit test and then focus on that Reddit test. Hopefully the idea though is that it shouldn't take you 50 different tests before you find one that works for you. Because now between the avatar, deep research, Gemini prompting, and now there's Reddit scraping, you should be able to find somebody that and an angle and avatar that can convert for you within about maybe 5 attempts. Right? Maybe do 2 avatars and maybe 3 Reddit tests or 3 avatars, 2 Reddit tests. Like ultimately speaking, I don't want to set a number because then if that expectation exceeds that, then you're going to want to quit and give up. And then maybe might have just taken you long depending on the product and niche you're advertising in. So I don't want to give you any arbitrary numbers that are just, averages based off of what I've seen. I want to tell you right now that each decision to relaunch a new ad set, testing a new avatar or a new Reddit story, you need to just keep in mind the previous test and figure out how can I get more close to the decision. Now, in saying that, sometimes you found an avatar that's actually really good, that resonates with the market, and the test still flopped. Why is that? That could be because the market itself is heavily advertising to that same avatar. So you got to understand that and you can see in real time how many variables are at play here. So it's hard to tell you guys do this at this time and do this at that time. You could be in a situation where the avatar you spoke to is a great avatar. It resonates really well. It's converting really well for your competition. But because of how much competition it is and how much your competition is spending, that avatar is only not converting because of just how competitive the avatar is. Right? Same thing with the Reddit stories. Maybe that tension point that you're creating copy around is just so competitive and it's hard to crack that code. So due to the sheer nature of how many variables are at play here, all you have to do is come up with hypothesis, test those hypotheses, write them down and figure out if your hypothesis was correct or wrong and move on. Try to look at your last failed attempt and see how you can try something new this next time. You don't want to just keep making new tests that are slightly different and not different enough. So I would even potentially consider alternating, right? Maybe do one avatar test, maybe do an avatar and Reddit test, or do an avatar test first and a Reddit test, and then if both of those flop, then you go back to an avatar, then a Reddit, and if those of those flop again, you can test and kind of go back and forth. What I will say is leverage the CBO, right? The CBO basically allows you to launch multiple ad sets, and Facebook will allocate spend based off of which one it thinks will perform the best. So I don't want you to launch too many ad sets in the CBO, but also, you can leverage that to your advantage, and it would make sense to have a minimum of 2 ad sets that you test each time. Have them test each other, have them both spend. I recommend a minimum of $50 spend on a ad set before deciding to cut or move on, or a minimum of 3 days of total spend, depending on which happens first. So like that's kind of the concept there. And, whenever you are testing, just keep in mind, right? Like you want to be analyzing your last test and see, okay, this next test, how is this different? how is this different? And is it different enough for me to know that whatever changes here will be significant for Facebook to analyze, right? So that's just some food for thought there, right? So that is day 4. What you should do now is schedule an ad set to go out the next day. You should figure out your next move by the end of day 3. So, if you look at this timeline here, we say days 1 to 3 don't do anything, but technically speaking, at the endish of day 3, you should be getting ready to know your next move. Now that you can see this timeline, you know what day 4 would consist of, which is launching a new ad set. So we always schedule ad sets, and we'll talk about this in a moment. Always schedule ad sets at night to go out the next day, at midnight, so it's a full entire day. So technically, at the end of day 3, you should be getting ready to make a decision. Right. If your ad metrics aren't the strongest, then I would recommend testing the Reddit extraction prompts and see if you need to cast a wider net. Set a minimum ad set spend of $10 for the new ad set variation and wait. So here's some food for thought on when should I use ad set minimum spending budgets. Let's use your brain for a little bit, so that way you don't have to ask a very nuanced question to an answer, because you understand the principle of minimum ad set budgets. So minimum ad set budgets are primarily leveraged to force spend on an ad set that's not getting spent. When does this normally happen? Well, if you have a campaign with that's been running for a few days and spending all its money on 1 or 2 ad sets, and then you deploy a new one, a lot of the times the first day or 2, those new ad sets are rarely ever going to get spent. Sometimes it can, but very rarely. And eventually you might come across 3-4 days and that ad set still isn't getting spent. Naturally speaking, that means Facebook doesn't believe that that ad set can outperform the current one that's getting all the spend. So we normally want to leverage the CBO in that way to let it just save us money, basically, because if we force spend on it and it just tanks, that means we're wasting our money. But if you really create copy and marketing material that you feel is distinctively different and can convert really well, and you really believe in it for whatever reason, that's when you can go ahead and edit the ad set and add a minimum spend. I would recommend you do it at night though, so the next day it can actually spend that minimum amount without interrupting the entire campaign and forcing spend in the middle of the day. Because whenever you adjust something like that in the middle of the day, it now triggers the entire campaign now. Because now Facebook has to say, hey, we anticipated spending all $100 on this one ad set or these 2 ad sets, but now you're forcing us now to allocate a minimum amount of spend in the middle of the day to this 3rd ad set. Now we gotta readjust how we deploy this. Doing that in the middle of the day can mess up the campaign. So I recommend, just like any other thing, any changes like that, do it at midnight. So at the end of the day. And do you have to do it exactly at 12 o'clock minute? No, you could just do it at the end of the day, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, whatever. And I know some of you are in different time zones and regions. Just do it when a few hours before the ads are set to go out the next day at midnight in the local region that you're advertising in. So that is just some food for thought there. So because now you understand the foundation of when to use or why we use minimum ad set budgets, you should now be able to deploy this information to your unique circumstances. So that means if you're in a situation and you're wondering, should I add a minimum $10 ad set? But you should be able to answer that question on your own, because now you know when we would do that is to force spend on an ad set that we believe is we believe has potential to convert, and we want to see if it can convert. And if it doesn't, that a lot of times means that Facebook just doesn't believe it's going to be a winner. Now, we could take it a step further and say, well, why do we believe this ad set isn't going to be a winner in Facebook's eyes? One of the biggest reasons that happens is because the ad set consists of ads that are already similar to the ones already being tested. So it's so important that whenever you're creating ad set variations and you're testing new ads, make sure they're different enough from your existing ads that are already being ran. If they're very similar due to Andromeda blends ads together that are similar and just deploys it. That's how it manages the system now. So if you create ad set variations, and again, if you're scaling, this is not applicable to you. You can scale with just a ton of the same variations and do as such. But again, focused on the people that are trying to get out of testing. If your ad set, if you notice you keep launching new ad sets and none of them are getting spent, and you wait a good 2 to 3 days and spend, give 2 to 3 days of solid waiting before you decide, okay, what do I do with this ad set? That's when, a lot of times it's just because your ad either sucks or it's a variation of an ad that's already being ran and it's too similar for Facebook to be able to justify putting spend behind it. All right. So that's just some things to keep in the back of your mind there. So ultimately speaking, that's what you would want to focus on there. So days 5 and 6. Days 5 and 6, do nothing. Give the new ad set variation some time to breathe. So if you added a new ad set, assuming you are getting solid data, right? Maybe you're not profitable yet, but you're assuming you're getting good data. Ad metrics aren't horrible and you're trending in the right direction. Days 5 and 6 will look as such, right? So you do nothing. You give the new ad set variation some time to breathe. What you want to do in this time is evaluate competitors and do more research to see what new audiences and messaging you can craft. Until you have a proven ad set that's converting, you need to take big swings with your copy and marketing. Creating variations of the same underperforming copy isn't going to get you anywhere. Now, to this point here, a couple notes here. So just as a reminder, these are the ideal ad metrics in USD, right? So we want to see lower than $80 CPM. So this is on the left-hand side, by the way, is general ballpark numbers that you're going to probably see in the first few days of testing. Again, your metrics aren't going to be the greatest in the first few days of testing. And then once optimized and scaling, this is on the right-hand side, what your numbers ideally would want to be when you're really locked in and your ads are converting. So when you're going to start testing, you're going to naturally see a little bit higher CPMs. As long as you're lower than $80 or relatively hovering around that, good. Same thing with CTRL, link click-through rate, right? These are the metrics that are okay, perfect. If I'm around these numbers, I'm solid. You're not going to be in these ideal ranges in the first 3 to 5 days of testing. That's just not going to happen. These are ideal ranges, assuming your ads are really starting to cook and it's been about a week of testing and it's starting to really lock around. As long as you're around that, boom, my ads are not horrible. They're trending in the right direction. If they are in these metrics, that's great. And if they're far outside of these metrics, then that's a problem. That's a big problem. All right, on the left-hand side, it's also important to note your very early you're in the very early stages of testing. 3 days is simply 3 days simply just to validate. Okay, I'm just double reading what I'm saying. 3 days, the 3-day test that we do is simply just to validate that there is potential with the product. You will almost never be profitable or even break even on the first 3 days of testing. So go into each test with the belief that you're just looking for potential, not profits. So remember, the whole idea of being a media buyer is buying data, buying acquisition, buying potential data to potential customers. So that's what you're doing these first 3 days. And for some of you, it might take 4 days or 5 days. 3 days is the minimum. Sometimes it can take up to a week of just letting ads run before you even touch anything or do anything. So gathering your 3-day test, after gathering your 3-day test, you need to gauge whether or not it makes sense to continue with your current avatar. So remember, that's back into the other training there. If you haven't watched it, that's phase 2, right? So that's going to be bucket 2 now, right? Avatar, phase 1 is just establish and see if it makes sense to continue. So mimicking the same trainings that is already there. So you need to gauge whether or not it makes sense to continue with the current avatar. General rule of thumb, if you're slightly below break even, continue with testing that avatar. It's all right. You're not going to be profitable. You're not going to be profitable. You're not going to break even. Some people are. Some people you'll see in the screenshots. Yeah, on day 1 I was at a 4x ROAS. You might have even seen a 4x ROAS on day 1, but day 2, 2 and 3 tanked. That's not bad. All right. You got some buying intent and you're not horrible well off. So that's good. If you're far below break even, example, your break even is 1.5, but you're at a 0.9 for the 3-day test, then it's your call based on your research and understanding of the market on whether or not it makes sense to continue. So if you're far below the ROAS that you want, and your ad metrics are also well out of KPI, they're nowhere close, that's your decision if you want to, feel like you can make better ads. Because again, I don't know how much work and effort you're putting into creating your own ads. So it's, like if you feel like you did the best you could and you came up with these numbers, then it's one thing. But if you feel like, oh, there's a room, there's more I can tap into, then it's your jurisdiction if you want to continue and continue to test that avatar. See if you can test another avatar that might be easier to crack into. Totally up to you. If based on your own research, you can clearly see multiple competitors scaling with that avatar and the niche and industry as a whole is growing, I recommend just doing a few ad set variations and try and improve your copy before you cut it and move on to a new ad set or a new product entirely. And if you did not get any sales whatsoever in the 3 days, then just move on to a new avatar unless you really believe you can improve something about your copy or website, right? So there are some circumstances where someone's ad metrics are really good. And they have some buying intent. They have some add to carts, some initiate checkouts, but they, for some reason, get any purchases at all. So obviously, we continue to let the 3 days run if we don't get purchases, assuming there is some buying intent. But if there's buying intent but no purchases at all after 3 days, then that's when we have to look at it and evaluate some things, right? So this is assuming you have multiple add to carts, multiple initiate checkouts, but for some reason, no one bought. If you have good ad metrics, that could just be something outside of that. So context is everything. So in this situation like this, I would continue to test and see if I can adjust my offer, or if it's something on my website. There's circumstances where it might be smart to create an avatar, right? So maybe you have a product that requires a little bit more trust with your target audience. That's for you to gauge based off the competition in your market, right? So we talked about it here in this training. When is it? Let's see here. When is profitable? I think I talked about it in this training. If I didn't, I'll talk about it now. Let's see, advertorial. Right here. It's right in front of me. So additionally, you may just be in a super competitive niche that requires more trust. Building an avatar might be a smart decision. So that's another question, and it's something I'm going to need to end up adjusting at some point too in the scaling trainings. In the scaling trainings, I've talked about in the past where, you want to create an avatar when you're at this level or this stage. Not true anymore, right? Like you can deploy avatars whenever you want, or you can deploy them at the first campaign that you launch. You want to do an avatar right away, even before just testing straight to a product page, or you want to wait a little longer to launch an avatar. Totally up to you. The whole premise here is that pre-landers and copy like avatorials is designed to build further trust with the person, really, further highlight the pain and agitation that they're going through. So if you do find that you have good ad metrics and you have buying intent and it's solid, you have a lot of ad to carts and initiate checkouts, and you're not getting any purchases, or you are getting purchases and you're far below KPI of your target ROAS of break even, you could of course feel free to duplicate those exact ads, run them against a advertorial and a new CBO, and see if that performs any better from you. From there, you can turn off the other ad set or the other campaign that was going straight to the product page first and scale the advertorial one if that's performing well for you. If not, that means it's an avatar problem. Or it could just be a website issue. So you'd have to start with the path of least resistance. So what I would do first is, in this circumstances, I would focus first on my website offer. You can run an A/B split test with your offer. You can make sure you create better product cards. You can incentivize more stuff with your offer. Make sure your add to cart is nothing wonky going on there. Make sure there's an add to cart drawer that further incentivizes scarcity and urgency. And then make sure you have all those premises checked in with a proven store. And then make some adjustments to that first and only. Do that for a little bit. At 48 hours, 72 hours, 2 to 3 days, nothing changes. Then I would consider putting an advertorial in, launch an advertorial for 2 to 3 days with the existing ads that you already created that were getting a lot of add to carts or good ad metrics. See if that performs any better. If not, then I'd move on to a new avatar and then rinse and repeat the process. All right. So next up as well, if your campaign ends off with a 2.5x ROAS or higher, you can increase the budget by $50 at midnight. This can happen at any point. If you just scheduled a new ad set, even with the previous day wasn't profitable, just know that by doing this, it will reset learning briefly, and it can cause Facebook to underperform for the next 24 to 48 hours, and that's fine. If it bounces back, that means you have something cooking, and continue to increase the budget by $30 to $50 a day after each profitable day at midnight. If it doesn't bounce back within 40 hours, that means you need to continue to test new copy until you find an ad that resonates with a bigger audience. If you increase budget and the campaign continues to underperform, you need to fuel it with new ad copy. Lowering the budget is just going to keep throttling the campaign and making it hard to be stable. So that's why I recommend only doing light budget increases until you have a surefire winner. So a winner is just considered a 3-day average of a 2x ROAS or greater. Now, notice I put a 3-day average here. Okay, why did I put a 3-day average? Because you can have a winner can still look good, on 2 of the 3 days, and one of those days it sucked. But that's fine. If the 3-day average says, hey, this is consistently doing 2x or greater, a consecutive 3-day average doing a 2x or greater, that's considered a winner, and you can keep doing slight budget increases, $30 to $50. I recommend you do light budget increases. I've been seeing that people that double without the experience of doubling in the past end up breaking their campaign because they're not adding enough new ads and not testing well enough. So to be safe, just do $30 to $50 increases after each profitable day. You do an increase, and there's 2 to 3 days where the campaign hasn't been profitable. Your job is to deploy more ads into the campaign, not turn off the budget and cut ads and whatnot. You're reducing the ability for Facebook to get better and relearn better. So the rule of thumb is, underperforming after once performing, you have to add in new ad sets, add new ads in. You can add new ads and new ad sets the same night, the same day as you're increasing the budgets. You can wait 24 hours, up to you. The rule of thumb is feed Facebook with more data, right? More unique ads, more unique concepts, more unique avatars. That way it has a better chance of finding, because if you were profitable for a couple of days, that means there's potential there. So don't just now cut the potential back by reducing the ad spend and then also removing and deleting ads. We'll talk about removing and turning off ads in a second here, but especially when you're doing these light budget increases, I promise you, like, you're not going to break a campaign, right? That means that Facebook just did not find a big enough cold audience, and you need to just create better ads that do. We'll talk about more of that in a moment here. We have a detailed FAQ here, which we'll be getting into, so a lot more to break down. So days 5 to 6, do nothing. Give the new ad set variation some time to breathe. What you want to do in this time is evaluate. Okay, so I already read this. So days 7 to 14, right? So from days 7 to 14, which by the way is about average time it takes for most people to get out of testing and learning. From days 7 to 14, your campaign should be old enough and have some solid data points to start becoming a little bit more aggressive with testing. So testing too many ad sets within 7 days is a little bit tricky because you're, one, not spending that much money, and then 2, the campaigns are fresh and you need to understand what you need to work on and what you don't need to work on, right? So it's important that you're really analyzing these first few days here and seeing, okay, what are my CPMs like? What are my CTRs like? What are the trends that are happening? And what do I need to do in my copy to make those appropriate changes? Remember, in the other training, I kind of highlight here, based off of what you're seeing go wrong or what metrics are not in KPI, what could be potentially going wrong with your copy or your website. So refer back to this when deciding on what decision I need to make with my copy. So that's very important there. Right. So that's important. So now you can start testing a little bit more aggressively, right? Assuming at this point you should have had at least one profitable day. And that's another question I might be getting here is, Alex, does it make sense to increase budget on non-profitable days? It definitely doesn't. If you have a non-profitable day, that means your ad did not convert and perform. So don't increase budget on non-profitable days. Only increase them on non-profitable days, or break even. I'll make an exception if you're break even on the day and you want to increase, because there's sometimes people that will come back the next day and buy, or the day after, assuming you set up your recovery emails. Make sure your recovery emails are set up. So that is fine if you want to do increased budgets on break even days, but generally speaking, it makes sense to increase on profitable days. At this point, you should be looking to launch new ad sets every other day. Each ad set should consist of 3 to 5 ads. Each ad should look and feel different. Again, we already addressed the importance of, do you need to put a minimum ad set spending limit on each of these ad sets? I recommend you don't. Leverage the CBO to its advantage, which is letting Facebook decide when to spend its money on. Unless you really feel like an ad set is like, hey, this is a really good concept, it should get some spend here. You can always go back in and add a minimum spend to the ad set. But again, just do that at midnight so you don't mess up anything there. All right, and that's going to kind of be your sequence there. So important rule of thumb, the same potential customer might come across multiple of your ads, especially within the same ad set. So it's important that every ad looks and feels different. This creates a tornado effect that helps avoid sales blindness and can leverage multiple touch points to get the customer over the edge. So here's an example of one of our members here. Finally break even while testing. Never give up, guys. Everything is possible in this world. God is good. I suggest using TrueROAS to track assisted conversions. In this case, my ad, which spent the most, the budget, had 0 sales, but it's actually had 2 assists. Without knowing that, I probably would have turned it off. So we already tackled this earlier in the trainings about the importance of using server-side tracking. And although it's optional as a beginner, you don't necessarily need it. I highly recommend it because things like this happen. So our buddy here, I can't pronounce his name, to be honest with you, but I call him Guy for short. He wrote in this post basically saying that a theory that I've always talked about, right? You have ads in an ad set. One is getting a ton of ad spend, and the logical thing to say is this ad's getting a lot of ad spend, but it's not converting. Maybe it spent $100 and it didn't get any sales. But this other ad here spent $20 and got 2 sales. So logically speaking, I should turn off the one that got all the spend with no sales and keep the one that got very little spend with 2 sales, right? A lot of times that is actually going to ruin the ad set and underperform, because the one that's getting a lot of spend is actually the one that's driving that initial touch point with the potential customer. And the one that got very little spend but the conversions is the one that's closing it. They're working in tandem. And turning off one, you affect the other. And we can see that with specifically platforms like TrueROAS, which again is optional but highly recommended, where they actually do something called assisted ads, where you can track and see which ads are actually assisting in the sale. Now, that's important to understand, because if an ad is actually contributing to the sale but not getting attribution, you would not want to turn it off, because then now the thing that's driving top of funnel awareness, getting really cool leads to be interested, is going to be the thing that you turn off, and now it ruins your entire ad set and campaign. So the better thing to do, right? So we rarely turn off ads within an ad set. A lot of times Facebook will push spend on an ad that doesn't get any direct conversions, but it leads to a lot of assisted sales. So the smarter thing to do is to create and test new ads and ad sets, create and test new ad sets that take over the spend rather than turning things off. So in a situation where you have an ad set that's severely underperforming in the campaign, look at these ad sets as individual folders that are helping to build up the campaign. Instead of just turning off an ad within the ad set, launch a new ad set variation, whether it's similar to the existing avatar or a completely new one, and allow that one to spend and try to get that one to outperform the other one rather than just turning off an ad. Because again, you're hurting Facebook's ability to learn, for one, and then 2, that ad is actually performing better than you realize. So just general rule of thumb there. Keep in mind, Facebook can only allocate so much spend to a ton of ad sets. So the idea is to be intentional with adding new ad sets, especially early on in testing within the first 1 to 7 days. Your goal is to try and be profitable overall. So you can increase the budget, which will allow you to add more ad sets to the campaign and build more stability with performance. So after every profitable day, increase the budget slightly because you overall want to be able to spend more on a campaign so you can add more ad sets and build stability. If you stay around $50 to $100 a day and you're never increasing the campaign budget, it's going to be really hard for you to build stability because you won't have enough creative diversity because again, Facebook can only spend on so much. If you're struggling to have profitable or break-even days, that means you're not creating good intentional ads. Focus on quality over quantity at that point. And then over time, once you get to days 7 to 14, that's when we can start deploying new ad sets and seeing what sticks. Cool. So I feel like at this point, we've addressed a lot of questions, but there's still so many more to address and answer. I'm going to put this in its own training. We're already 37 minutes in, and this is just going to be FAQs of other questions that I've gotten throughout DMs and in the community. And hopefully I can address some more detailed questions for you guys that you might be wondering. And yeah, see you guys in the next.